Welcome to the Baseball Insiders. I am Adam Weinrib, joined as always by Fanside. It's MLB insider Robert Murray here on a Friday afternoon for our final show of the week. Roki Sasaki. I thought we might be talking about the decision when we signed on this morning. We got the word that the Padres were out down to the Dodgers and Blue Jays, but also kind of silent on the front of even getting a double confirmation on the Padres being out. So I know we'll have some curious listeners from specifically those three markets watching the show today. We will talk about what we know on Roki, as well as the Pete Alonso gap between his camp and the New York Mets. And we're going to take some time to answer your questions. But first, we're going to talk about, obviously, the incredible, one-of-a-kind Bob Uecker. I've got Milwaukee shirt, Milwaukee Braves hat, full Uecker gear today for a good reason. A good man, an incredible man, not a hilarious baseball commentator, the best comedian in the world who just also happened to be a baseball announcer. There's nobody like it, but we will talk about that down the line. Of course, welcome all your questions. We'll address them at the end of the show and throughout as appropriate. Robert Murray, all things considered, kind of a wild end of the week. Maybe a little movement here, maybe a little AJ Minter. Maybe we're seeing the Mets pivot in action. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here. We got a lot to talk about. Some that we expected to talk about, others with Bob Uecker that it's kind of really sad to talk about, but also excited to share some stories because he meant a great deal to myself and a lot of people who are around him. But the notebook is full today. We've got movement around baseball. We've got trades happening with the Pirates and Red Sox. We got lots with Pete Alonso, Roki Sasaki, you name it. I'm excited to break it all down. Adam, how you doing? I'm excited that you're here with me.
I'm excited to be here. I almost forgot we're going to do a full 20 minutes on the Chase Shugart trade. So if you're interested in the Shugart information, stick around until the 12-minute mark through the 48-minute mark. We'll just do a full breakdown. But appreciate everybody being here. As always, if you're here for the first time, welcome. We love you to subscribe. If you're here, you want to learn more, you're curious, hit the join button. You can become a member. That's where you get the Discord link. We'll see you in there. You can join at the Rumor Mill tier or the All-Star tier. We've got some Discorders in the comments as always. You'll love to see it. They show up and they make their voices heard. It's good stuff. If you're an all-star, you get private Q&As with Robert and sometimes me. If you want me, if you don't, I will leave. And then you get priority in the chat as well. So when we see your questions, we'll make sure to answer them. And subscribe to the Moonshot as well. That is Fanside at MLB's newsletter. It's weekly. And that's where the team, including Robert, and also I might pop in there. You never know. We'll break down all the biggest stories in the big leagues with humor, insight, and behind-the-scenes info. Humor, kind of my thing, so I'll make sure to contribute that when I am involved. But otherwise, that's all the information y'all need. I would love to see you there. Let's talk Roki first, just because woke up this morning, get the Francis Romero tweet saying the Padres are done and they're moving on to their other international pursuits. I expected to get maybe a news drop shortly thereafter saying that someone was not done, that of the three finalists, one of the teams that surged ahead and finished something off. But instead, we not only haven't gotten a winner, we also haven't even gotten confirmation on the Padres being out. And we did get the Toronto Blue Jays nabbing $2 million of international money, along with Miles Straw, who, if that allows them to make a move on Roki or clean up some of the mess from the other Roki teams and get the overflow prospects, that's a big one. If all it means is they get Miles Straw, then it's a small one. But what's the latest you're hearing? And I know that you've been scrambling around all morning on this.
Yeah, I've been scrambling around all morning. I've seen the reports suggesting that the Padres are out on Roki Sasaki. I cannot confirm those at this point just because no one's getting back to me. It's radio silence. I don't know what to make of that. But Francis Romero is credible. He is a good reporter. So if he says it, I believe it. But I have not been able to independently confirm that on my own end. So take that for whatever it's worth. But what we can say is that the Dodgers have long been in the driver's seat in the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes. They have long been considered the favorite by just about everyone in baseball. And I see nothing to suggest otherwise at this point. The big competition here seems like it's coming from the Blue Jays as well. And their emergence in the finalist list kind of really caught myself and I believe others off guard. The fit makes sense because they need pitching, they need front-facing talent, they need a lot of different help to try to convince Vlad Jr. and Bo Bichette to stay long-term, but also just to compete in general. And as far as the trade that they made today, where they acquired $2 million in international space. Like, that's not insignificant. That's not small. And in my head, that to me gave me two ideas. One, they may have the indication that they've gotten Sasaki, or two, they believe he's going elsewhere and they're trying to make a last ditch effort to go out and get Sasaki. And my belief is it's probably when I say my belief, this is just my own speculation, because I mean, it's radio silence on a lot of different ends at this point. But my guess, Cooper, hey, sorry, we got Cooper kicking my desk over here. But my guess is this is probably a last ditch effort to try to convince Sasaki to come to Toronto, because they've swung and missed on a lot of different players, and they clearly have invested a lot into this. And I'm not saying the Padres or Dodgers haven't, but they're going to try to do everything in their power to try to convince him to come to Toronto. And we'll see ultimately what ends up happening. Nobody at this point knows. I don't even know if Sasaki knows at this point. So we'll see, but it's just a huge mystery right now. But my guess is it's in order is Dodgers, Blue Jays, Padres. And Andrew Lee, I see the comments saying that the Padres need pitching. I'm aware of that. But they might be on the outside looking in at this point.
I was not aware of that, so good to see that. Now I know. But yes, no, it's a tough situation for San Diego. Tough to get confirmation here, but we do have some credible names this morning delivering the news that nobody in San Diego wanted to read. A complicated offseason for them may have just gotten more complex. And the Blue Jays throwing that money out there, taking a stand, doing all they can to maximize their chances. You mentioned wanting to show Vlad Guerrero Jr. they're serious, wanting to show Bo Bichette they're serious. Some other way they could do that perhaps would be to add Pete Alonso to the mix, and maybe someday they'll have to show Pete Alonso they're serious. For the first time in an offseason full of questions about whether the Mets cared about Pete Alonso as much as the media cared about connecting Pete Alonso and the Mets, it did seem that yesterday may have been somewhat of a breaking point. An offer that was called a last-ditch offer for 3 years and $68 to $70 million. There was something up in the air on whether or not it had opt-outs involved. Early reports said it didn't. Then clarifiers said actually it did. Either way, there's no way of knowing if an offer is last ditch or not until the offseason is over and Pete Alonso is on a different team. But for a reported counter and supposed breaking point, that is pretty low from the New York Mets. And they know that Alonso turned down a 7-year, $158 million deal. They know they don't have to go there. They know the market is drier than they thought. But it does seem as if what we heard yesterday is the Blue Jays are involved. There are a few other teams involved. And that if that is truly a last-ditch offer, I don't know if they're coming to an agreement at anything approximating that point. So curious to your thoughts on the likelihood of the Mets and Alonso getting back together and the likelihood of that number moving at all, I would say.
I think the number has some wiggle room as far as what the Mets could be willing to offer Alonso. We just have not gotten to that point. But I've seen a lot of comments suggesting that the Mets are pivoting away, that they're that Alonso appears destined to head elsewhere. I mean, that certainly is possible for sure. But until Alonso ends up signing elsewhere, I'm still going to believe that the Mets are firmly involved in this thing. And for all offseason, I've suggested and thought that Alonso is the best fit for the Mets and that the Mets are the best fit for Alonso. And I still believe that. I think there's been a lot of talks this offseason. There's been very little progress as far as negotiations between the two sides. And it's allowed other teams to get involved in this bidding. You see Toronto get involved, and they absolutely need another power hitter in that lineup. If you put Pete Alonso and Vlad Jr. in the lineup together, and maybe you end up adding some other players alongside of those guys, then you could have the makings of maybe a playoff contender. But the Jays are not just Pete Alonso away from going back to the postseason. They need more help than that. But I do respect the fact that they're continuing to be active in negotiations there. And the report yesterday from Ken Rosenthal suggested that there's a third team involved. We don't know exactly who that could be at this point. But with such little, how do I want to phrase this? There's not a clear other firm contender or leader for Alonso at this point, which really can open up the door for a lot of these different teams to go out and do it. We saw the Giants, as I reported the other day, they've had a conversation recently with Randall Grichuk's camp. Maybe they can end up trying to get involved. I mean, I still think the Seattle Mariners make a lot of sense. But that being said, I can't imagine there's a scenario in which they spend that kind of money unless they trade one of their starters, which is a scenario I don't think that they should do. But it's a mystery on what the third team could be involved in this. But with Alonso still on the board, not ruling the Mets out, Blue Jays, they do have a chance here. We'll see, but I don't get the indication that anything is close.
Although the Mets, it's confusing to call it a pivot until you know whether or not Alonso has a market developing. Chris Kern commented that the Mets offers market value. I don't think it should be, but it does kind of feel like right now it may be because I don't know who else is involved. So it feels like a low ball to me, but it's January 17th. We're waiting for the bigger offer to materialize.
Exactly. And also another thing too is the Mets are so secretive with their information. It is really curious that all that information about Alonso's talks ended up leaking out. That feels kind of intentional to me. That's my own guess, my own speculation, but things get out for a reason sometimes. And I wonder if that could end up being one of those reasons. Andrew Lee, any positive Padres news? You signed Martin Maldonado. That's what I got for you. So that's the positive Padres news I have for you right now.
It's beautiful to live in San Diego and you have AleSmith beers at your disposal. So I wish I was in San Diego, but not for baseball reasons right now. The Mets did sign Jesse Winker to a deal that I would say, I don't know, $7.5 million with escalators to $9 million. That's more than I thought, but obviously someone who worked well in that clubhouse last year and doesn't work well in every clubhouse. And they go out and get AJ Minter today as well, who is somebody the Red Sox were playing around with. I know he's not at the Tanner Scott level, the 20 million AAV, but 2 years, 22, and an opt-out after one, totally reasonable deal. These are two players the Mets could have signed, and it would have no bearing on Pete Alonso, essentially. Like, those are things that they could absolutely afford, and the kind of things that winning teams do in addition to importing bigger name power hitters like Pete Alonso. So I guess curious on whether you view that as a pivot or just sort of smart roster building at a moderate cost.
I think it's smart roster building. I think you're spot on with that, Adam. And as far as Alonso goes, the Mets are not out. This is just an opportunity where the Mets wanted to add outfield depth. They wanted to add bullpen depth, and they ended up doing it. Maybe this can end up meaning that the Mets are pivoting away from a guy like Tanner Scott, who is going to command a very lucrative multi-year contract. So I think that could end up being a fair assumption. But Alonso is still in play with the Mets. It's just there's a huge gap in negotiations, as we've been mentioning on this podcast for a month or so now. That's the current reality that where the things stand with the Mets. But they have a lot of money to operate with. They are one of the most big spending teams in baseball, and with an owner like Steve Cohen, they're afforded that luxury. So Alonso is still in play. But yeah, it's not looking good right now.
Well, it sounds like, much like Biscuit in the other room, the two sides have briefly stopped talking, although we'll probably start talking again at some point. And when they do, you will hear it, much like, again, Biscuit in the other room. Before we move on to your questions, obviously we want to reserve as much time as we need and we can to talk about Bob Uecker, who passed away yesterday at the age of 90. It was announced by the team yesterday. Again, like there are wonderful announcers. There are top tier announcers. There are incredible humans. There's still nobody like Bob Uecker. And if you are someone who knows him just as the Brewers play-by-play guy who never lost a step at all, even when I listened to Bob Uecker on, Sirius MLB radio call Sal Frelick's debut, driving in the car with my dad coming back from Cooperstown a year and a half ago, you would never know this man was 90. He added such gravitas and humor to every call. And it was hard to believe that he was still that good at what he did at that age. But again, if you haven't watched him in the 70s and 80s, like, this is a world-class comedian who also just happens to be in the broadcast booth for a full 162 game season. And I know he was even better behind the scenes, and the relationships he had with the Brewers players, with the people around the Brewers, transcended the game of baseball.
Oh, it totally did. And when the news broke that Bob Uecker had passed yesterday, I texted Pat Murphy, the Brewers manager, and just extended my good thoughts. And he responded with, "One of a kind is somehow an understatement." And I don't know if there's ever a way to better describe Bob Uecker. Like, he was a legend in Milwaukee. Like, he was Brewers baseball. He was, for as great of an announcer as he was, he was an even better person. He was an even better storyteller. The ability that he had to command a room was second to none. And I got to spend a lot of time around him when I was in Milwaukee, when I was there for 3 years covering the Brewers. Got to see him on a daily basis. He would see me in the locker room and he'd say, "Robbie, baby." Like, he's the only person who can get away with calling me Robbie. And he has the ability to make anyone and everyone feel special and feel important. And I watched him build relationships with Craig Counsell, with Pat Murphy, with the front office, with the players. And every single time you heard the players and everyone around the Brewers talk about him, it was like he was part of the team. He was special. He was, is, and forever will be special. And I watched Uecker go around that clubhouse after the Mets eliminated the Brewers in the postseason. And I watched him deliver the news about his illness to a lot of different people. I wasn't allowed to say anything, but you could read between the lines of like what was happening. And I was talking to Christian Yelich, and he and I were talking about our offseason plans and just catching up after the season was over. And 30 minutes later, he disappeared and went to talk to Uecker, came out, and he was just in tears. And you watched the other players in the locker room, they were in tears. And Devin Williams, who had just blown the game for Milwaukee, he was talking to Uecker, and you could just tell he was taken aback by everything. And the Brewers were not, I mean, they're obviously sad about their season ending, but they were way more devastated about the news that Uecker dropped to him. They didn't know if he was going to end up like announcing a game again. They didn't know anything, but they knew that their time with Uecker was limited, and the impact he had on that locker room, I cannot tell you how important he was to that team. And that's a huge blow. I don't know how they're going to honor him, but they are going to do anything and everything possible to do it and to try to do him justice. And I've met a lot of different people in baseball. None have been like Uecker. He is one of one. There's no one like him. There will never be another person like him. Meant a lot to me, even though I made a very, very, very small imprint on his life. But I'm forever thankful for him, for sure.
Yeah, no matter what they do to honor him, it will be very apropos, but never enough. As we know that there is there's nobody like Bob Uecker, and there's no reason. That doesn't mean there's no reason to try, because we do need to continue to operate under that same, guiding principle of his humorous comedic spirit. That the fact that he called so many decades of Brewers baseball and never saw a World Series, for many, that is heartbreaking. But for him, it was a chance to watch a baseball game and bond with players and bond with the people of that city and of Milwaukee every day. So, yeah. And also, thankfully, 1964 world champion. He does have a ring. He has a title. So I wish he had gotten to call one, of course, but for Uecker, it was more about the journey. And for the rest of us too, it was more about the narration and the storytelling. And yeah, thank you for sharing all that and opening up the door a little bit to the locker room, because we could all tell that something was going on, but nobody knew that level of devastation was what was happening that night.
No, for sure. And I mean, I wasn't allowed to say anything, and truthfully, that wasn't my place to say anything. But I know after that clubhouse we walked out of there. I walked out with Todd Rosiak, Adam McCalvey, and we all looked at each other, and it was just like, holy shit. Like, it was, it'll live with me forever, because it was a powerful moment. It was a huge thing. Now I remember, because I had to drive all the way from Milwaukee to Sheboygan after that. So that's an hour drive. And I just thought about it. I cried. I mean, I grew up listening to Uecker. Like, he was like the voice that you would listen to as you were falling asleep or just in the car listening to a ball game. And it felt like, even before I covered the Brewers, it felt like I knew him. It felt like I had that relationship. It felt like he and I were boys, but in reality, at that point, I didn't know who he was. And then when I got to actually meet him and get to know him and be around him on almost a daily basis, he was freaking awesome. Like, he was so cool. He's the coolest person I've ever met. I don't know if I'll ever meet someone cooler, because he was Bob freaking Uecker. And he talked to Yelich, he talked to Brandon Woodruff, he talked to anybody around the Brewers. They all had that same opinion of him. Like, he was one of the players, and they treated him as such. He treated them as like they were like his own. And yeah, he was a freaking cool dude. For everything you've ever heard about Bob Uecker as a dude, I will confirm it right now, and then some, because he was just that cool.
Trying to make me cry on the Baseball Insiders podcast is nasty work, but you know what? On today of all days, very appropriate.
No, for sure. Sorry for trying to make you cry, Adam, but it's very rare. I try to get sentimental on this podcast, but Bob Uecker will bring it on to me for sure.
Yeah.
And he's deserving of it for sure.
It is easy to get me, but well deserved. And just we could not send more of our thoughts to the city of Milwaukee, and I'll be thinking of Bob all weekend without a doubt, and in perpetuity. Whenever the season begins again, I'll be wondering where he is and trying to find moments of zen, similar zen to think of him. Well, appreciate all of that, of course. Going to get to a few of your questions before we sign off, obviously, and we'll be back next week, next Wednesday. Next Monday is a holiday. Enjoy the long weekend. If you want to join us in the Discord, we will be answering questions there, I'm sure. But no show until Wednesday afternoon. That's a 1 o'clock Eastern. Subscribe, pound your notification bell. You'll get all the information you need. Going to help out some Red Sox fans here and at least try to give a little bit of information. Got a few questions, Red Sox news aside from the Shugart trade. Will the Red Sox get Bregman or Scott? We know the Red Sox were in on Minter, so we know they're in the reliever market, and we obviously know they're in the Alex Bregman market. I feel like the world is starting to realize that the Red Sox have put together a pretty good team this year, and maybe another piece could get them over this nice little cliff's edge. But thoughts on Boston and their pursuits?
I'll start with this. Craig Breslow's ability to get meaningful players, for players that they ended up designating for assignment, should not be understated, because the player that they ended up getting today, I believe it was Matt McShane. He was a 14th round pick from the Pirates for a player in Chase Sugar, I can't pronounce his name.
I've been saying
I'm going to start my Uecker feels.
Yeah, I've been saying Shugart, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. But his ability to get talent for players that they designated for assignment should not be overstated. I think it was a nice ad for the Red Sox, and they believe that McShane has upside there from being a early teens pick. So good job by them. But they were involved in the Minter sweepstakes, but they have cast a wide net in the bullpen market. They also have shown interest in Tanner Scott. There's been other relievers that they've shown interest in as well. So I firmly expect the Red Sox to lead this offseason with a reliever. That seems like it's something that's pretty important to that front office, as well as possibly adding another bat. So we'll see. But that's my current read on that one as of right now.
Roldis Chapman didn't do it for him, I guess. No, obviously the Red Sox are still involved in that market. Thank you for asking that question, of course. Going to toss it to, we got 2 super chats. Christian 5 did say never forget who you are inside. Robert, I assume that you will never forget who you are inside, correct?
No, I will not. But I will say I will never forget Gresham 5. He is the man, the myth, the legend. And Gresham 5, I hope you enjoy your Gresham 5 time this weekend, because there is nobody more deserving. We love you on this podcast, Gresham 5.
We can always use a reminder to remember who we are. And so appreciate that as well. But Jonathan Corona also did have another super chat asking about the Angels. And the further we get in the offseason, the longer it becomes confusing that the Angels haven't really stepped out of their comfort zone since Kikuchi, since they took over that early wave of the offseason. Santander, Jack Flaherty, who posted some pretty sad stuff today while waiting for the Roki news to drop, by the way. Jack Flaherty with the Michael Jordan gif and a sitting waiting on the sidewalk gif. So thoughts on the Angels as well as maybe the Flaherty market, because he's nudging at something, but I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know what's going on with Flaherty there, but I will say this: as far as the Angels go, they have remained involved in the bat market. They've looked for bats. They've maintained conversations there. But that being said, that they're not going to be in a position where they're going to overspend for one of these players. I thought it wasn't very smart to go out and jump the market for a guy like Kikuchi. I think Kikuchi will help that rotation for sure, and they absolutely needed reinforcements there. But the price they paid for him was pretty extensive and pretty high. So I wouldn't expect them to go out and overspend for a hitter unless Artie Moreno wakes up a certain morning feeling a way for a hitter. We'll see there, but they do like hitters. They're very open to the idea of adding another hitter. But as of last check, which was, I believe, last night, I didn't get the indication that anything was close.
What about the Atlanta Braves, who lost AJ Minter officially today? We know they've been a team where you go to Braves Twitter and they're definitely talking about Tanner Scott. It's unclear how substantive that is, but you have to think the Braves probably do make some sort of statement before we get too close to spring training here.
Yeah, the Tanner Scott fit makes total sense for the Braves, and I believe they have had some sort of conversation there, which is no surprise because I've heard there's almost every contending team that's been in on Tanner Scott. So the fact that the Braves have at least had conversations there, not surprising whatsoever. But we can learn from their Jeff Hoffman pursuit that they are looking for another starting pitcher, which obviously that makes sense. We could identify that throughout this. Basically, you can identify that coming into the offseason that they needed another starting pitcher. And the fact that they were willing to spend 5 for 48 or around 48 suggests that they do have money to spend there for the rotation for sure. That will not be the kind of money that gives a Jack Flaherty or any meaningful starter quite like that. So unless they pony up, I mean, you never know. But they have been active looking for different reinforcements around the roster. That much I know. But Robert G., great name, by the way. The one thing we've always known about Alex Anthopoulos is he operates in silence. And that is why I have the Braves Twitter notifications on, because you never know when he's going to drop something. I don't know of anything imminent. But they do have I do know that they've been having plenty of conversations there.
And Robert G, the G, I believe, stands for Aggression 5. So thank you for your question. We appreciate all the super chats. One more note before we sign off. There was a question of whether we did a Hall of Fame ballot podcast. We have not done a Hall of Fame ballot podcast. Not going to do our full ballots, but I do think so far 3 clear names have emerged with potentially a 4th. And I love it. The guys who I want to see in the Baseball Hall of Fame are getting into the Baseball Hall of Fame this year, it would seem. Carlos Beltran's going to be real close, if not this year, next year. Chase Utley making a meaningful surge. Love to see that. Andrew Jones probably feels like a ballot number 10 guy when everybody's feet are to the fire and they have to decide, we forgot to elect him for 9 years. And now we have no time left. All right, let's do it now. I think he probably gets in as well, but this year looking pretty clear cut. Wagner, CC, Ichiro, the latter 2 first ballot, and the first one last ballot. And I'm good with that. I'm good with King Felix sticking around too, and David Wright probably sticking around. Pedroia sticking around. Let's have these conversations. Not first ballot guys, but or Wright second ballot. But I think people are using the ballot smartly. I like what I'm seeing. I think some deserving names are getting in this year.
No, I totally agree. Although one thing I will say is I will not get into Hall of Fame talk. I think that is a very dangerous game to play. I'm not eligible yet to vote for the Hall of Fame, but I'm not sure if I will do it when that opportunity eventually comes. We'll see. But yeah, that's one thing I try not to talk about too much because that just leads to a whole different mess in the mentions and just elsewhere.
Yeah, well, we'll know on Tuesday night who gets into this year's class. One of my favorite times of year, but obviously the mentions are a nuclear tire fire when that happens. So appreciate everyone joining us today. Special show, a little bit of a different show in the middle, but absolutely required it. We hope everybody enjoyed. I know, enjoyed. It's difficult to enjoy such a touching tribute, but I think you did a powerful job, man. And appreciate everybody showing up. And most of all, Robert Murray, I appreciate you for coming on today and sharing news, sharing updates, and sharing some personal stories.
No, for sure. I'm happy to do it. Uecker definitely warrants it. And I'm glad you guys listened to it and I didn't bore you with my stories on Uecker. But no, it's appreciated. Thank you for letting me talk about it, Adam. Joanne, our lovely producer, thank you for putting up with me and letting me talk about Uecker as well. Everyone in the comments, we appreciate you. Andrew Lee, why am I not eligible for the Hall of Fame? Because I've not been in the Baseball Writers Association long enough yet. So,
and he didn't play 10 years in Major League Baseball, so not eligible for the Hall.
I didn't.
No, I don't know. Maybe you did. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a big idiot.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that. I'll never let you joke about that. Aaron Wilder, I believe that's how you pronounce her name. Cooper is indeed a first ballot inductee into the Hall of Fame. So good scoop by you.
Yeah. I muted myself every time I wasn't talking today because Biscuit was just going hog wild in the other room. But I guess they can probably both be first ballot, you would think. We don't have a 1-dog limit on the first ballot.
Yeah, no, it's going to be Cooper and Biscuit 1A and 1B. And yeah, we got some special pups in the podcast. So good job, Biscuit. Good job, Cooper. Good job, Adam. See everyone back here for what day is it again, Adam?
Wednesday, 1:00 Eastern. Come join us again if you have questions in the interim, and I'm sure you will because I think news is probably going down soon-ish. We're going to be away for the weekend and away from Monday's show, but come join us on Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock.
Let's do it. Let's make it happen. I appreciate everyone. Thank you, everybody.
Until then, we'll see you.